Hi everybody, I'm Michael. So this is a review for Murder on Air. It stars Inspector Roderick Alleyn, who is apparently a famous detective. He was on the list of like the 20 greatest detective fictions detectives of all time. I'd never heard of this character before, but it is pretty good. So he's in the style of like the a British detective who works with the police, and there are plenty of those in the world of detective fiction. And it was an interesting story. So the premise is that this man was killed while listening to the radio, and I get the sense this story was written in the 1930s because, you know, the radio was treated as like this big fancy new deal. And he was killed while turning the knobs on the radio. It looks like he was electrocuted. That's what the original doctor figures out. And he was killed on Christmas Eve. So Inspector Alleyn basically comes in. He's pretty thorough, and I like his lines. Like, he's like, I don't have any imagination. That's not in my job description. My job is to work with facts and figure out what happened. He basically goes through all the various people in the manor in turn and questions them and gets a sense of what happened last night. Basically, the victim was really terrible to his wife and his children, and so the two sons left around 10 o'clock, and they left their key. I mean, they took their keys on the. That's sort of a big deal that there are like 3 keys on the hook, and like one's missing, and then 2 of them are gone, or they should have been gone because the sons were out. And the wife had a nervous breakdown earlier that morning, so the doctor was summoned, and he said he would call in an hour just to double check on her, and if nobody answered, then he wouldn't bother, and that's exactly what happened. And the victim was also mean to his daughter, who apparently, it seems silly to say, but she was walking down the hallway when she sees the butler and realizes all of a sudden that she loves the butler passionately, and they kiss each other, and he loves her. And basically the victim saw, and he was super happy because this gave him a chance to basically chew out both of them and be terribly rude to both of them. Yeah. So he pretty much locked the daughter inside her room while he read the riot act to the butler, and that's sort of his thing. Not long after he was murdered with the electrocution through the radio. And we know because, like, the lights went off and then they went back on in, like, 7 minutes. So basically what happens, the culprit killed him and very quickly went downstairs, fixed the fuse, and then left. Also fixed the murder scene. So Alleyn inspects the murder scene. Throughout the whole time, he's been, like, inspecting the murder scene with his helpers. Like, one's a fingerprinter. And he notices that the radio, when you take off the knobs, there are 2 holes right above like the knob holes, and he notices that the knobs tend to match the knobs on like the curtains, so like curtain knobs, and he sees a little bit of like this paper inside, and he's able to deduce that the culprit just bore these holes into the thing, put the curtain rod knobs in, used the paper to hold them into place, and so is able to run them. I didn't quite get the next part, which was messing with some sort of wires or electrical outlet on the inside of the radio to basically send just a ton of charge through it. And the butler looks very, very guilty because the victim had a very peculiarity, which he did just to annoy the butler, which was he licked things with his finger. Yeah, so he licked both thumbs before operating the knobs. And he did this with everything, but he especially did with the radio knobs. And the butler lies about this peculiarity. Now, that happens to be fatal for the victim because, hey, guess what? Because the knobs are wet while he's running this huge electrical current through them, it killed him instantly. So the butler looks a little guilty, and spoiler alert, so if you want to read the story on your own, you know, stop watching the rest of this video. I'd recommend the story. I'd give it a thumbs up. This Inspector Alleyn seemed very thorough. He seemed like an interesting character. We didn't get a whole lot of him in the story, but he seemed interesting, and the story was reasonably well done. I like how things slowly unfolded over time. We get this little timeline and all the various characters. It was actually a lot longer than I thought it would be. So it was a good short story. It could be a novella. I didn't do a word count on this particular one. Anyway, the culprit is actually the police doctor. The police doctor who had secretly fallen in love with the wife, apparently. So, he basically writes a suicide note because he realizes the jig is up, and he writes a suicide note confessing everything and getting the butler off the hook. So it was kind of a dark ending there, but it did satisfactorily explain everything in the mystery, and I give it a thumbs up. I wouldn't mind reading more stories, reading this Inspector Alleyn. He seems like an interesting fellow, and it looks like I haven't even gotten to his more interesting stories. Apparently he has a wife, and she's super interesting too. This is interesting because, you know, I've been reading all these famous detectives, and I don't think any of them are married. Are any married? I know Agatha Christie has like a pair of detectives that are married to each other, but usually, you know, these detectives aren't married, so yeah, I don't know why that's the case. I know, like, obviously the hard-boiled detectives, you know, the criminal noir detectives aren't married because they treat women like garbage, so I doubt any of them would ever get married. Perry Mason, it seems like he should get married to his secretary, but he won't, because if he married her, he'd have to fire her. That's the premise, because it's working off like this old-fashioned 1930s premise that if a woman's married, she can't work as a secretary anymore. What even is that rule? Why is that a rule? I don't know. Anyway, so that's why he doesn't marry a secretary, even though he really wants to. And it's basically set up so that he's going to marry her whenever he quits the practice or something like that. I don't know. I only read the one Perry Mason story. Maybe I'm just making stuff up. Anyway, so yeah, I wouldn't mind reading more Inspector Alleyn stuff in the future. Seems interesting. Okay, so I give it a thumbs up. Bye!